Hey guys, welcome to Elevated Systems. I'm your host CJ, and today we're taking a look at the Aorus Waterforce 240 all-in-one liquid cooler, not to be confused with the older and less than perfect Aorus Waterforce X240. This is a new AIO, and I'm not sure if it's an upgrade or a downgrade or just a whole new cooler, but we're gonna figure it out. Let's do this. Okay, we're gonna just jump right into this. The agenda, first we'll unbox the AIO and see what it comes with and go over some of the technical specs, as well as point out some of the differences from the Waterforce X. I'll quickly go over the installation and setup process, demonstrate the software and features of the cooler, and finally I'll test the cooling performance of the AIO compared to all the 240mm AIOs in my inventory. Now, the first thing to highlight in the unboxing is the box or packaging material, which is a lot of closed cell foam, which when I'm unboxing a $1,000 graphics card, I don't mind seeing. However, when it comes to a $100 to $200 AIO, this can be done just as effectively and more environmentally friendly with recyclable materials like fiberboard. The Waterforce 240 comes with two 100mm Aorus silent fans that operate at 950 to 2150 RPM, producing an airflow of 27 to 56 cubic feet per minute and a max static pressure of 2.77 millimeters H2O. The 9 translucent blades are illuminated by 8 hub-mounted addressable RGB LEDs, and these are different fans than the Waterforce X fans with a reduced max RPM and pressure. The aluminum radiator measures 277 by 119 by 27 millimeters with an approximately 15 millimeter thick fin stack and a fin density of 20 fins per inch spread between 12 water channels. It's connected to the pump block with nylon sleeve 39 millimeter tubes, which are slightly larger in diameter than most AIO tubes, having an inside diameter of 7.8 millimeters. The pump block measures 74 millimeters high with a diameter of 82 millimeters and has a 64 millimeter copper cold plate. The major difference here is that unlike the Waterforce X, this pump block does not include the 60 millimeter LCD screen and instead just includes a rotatable mirrored RGB Aorus logo display. The AIO includes mounting hardware for all modern consumer motherboard sockets, including the soon-to-be released Intel LGA 1700 socket and AMD Threadripper sockets. And again, there is a lot of excess packaging included to holding all this mounting hardware. This AIO uses a 100% Asetek mounting system, and the large pictographic instruction sheet is easy enough to follow. I'm installing this on my Ryzen 3700X based test bench, so installation on the AM4 socket includes placing the Mylar washers and screwing the AMD standoff screws to the stock backplate. Position the AMD mounting bracket on the pump block and rotate to lock in place. Finally, apply thermal compound. Importantly, don't forget to peel the protective film from the cold plate. Line up the bracket over the standoff screws and secure in place with thumb screw caps. The AIO also comes with multiple radiator screws and standoffs, which are used with specific Aorus cases. To connect the fans, just plug them into the fan splitter cable that's attached to the radiator. RGB cables can be daisy-chained and connected to the 3-pin ARGB cable on the radiator. There are 2 cables on the pump block to connect a SATA power cable that needs to be plugged into an open SATA connector from your power supply, and then there's this USB cable that connects the hub to an open USB 2.0 header on your motherboard. This allows for full software control of the RGB elements and the pump and fans. It will also require you to disable your CPU fan in BIOS to avoid the boot error. Let's take a look at how to install and set up the Aorus software. Navigate to the Aorus Waterforce 240 product page, and in the support tab, there are 2 utilities. Download and install the Aorus engine and launch the application. Okay, I have Aorus Engine open in the top left of the screen, and you should be able to see any changes I make on the bottom right. In Aorus Engine, you can set the curves or modes of both the AIO fans and pump. Let's start with the pump, which by default is set to its maximum RPM, which, if an AIO pump isn't unusually loud, is where I typically keep the set speed. However, there are a few options in the menu, including a custom section where you can set your own pump curve. Keep in mind that to reduce the wear and tear on the pump, it's best to allow it to run at a steady speed, as the process of ramping up and down puts the most stress on the pump and can reduce its lifespan. Moving on to the fans, by default, they are set at a steady speed of about 1350 RPM, and there are 6 preset fan curves or modes available, including a 0 RPM mode. This is done by simply shutting off the 12-volt power supply to the fans, and although that just the water flowing through the AIO is capable of semi-passively cooling the CPU at idle, well, depending on your CPU, just like the pump, the fans wear out faster from continually changing speeds, especially ramping up from 0. There's also a custom mode where you can set your own fan curve. When you're finished, just hit apply to set your selections. Now, to adjust the lighting, just click the LED icon down here, which will launch the RGB Fusion software. In here, you can set the RGB effects of the pump and fan separately. However, if you want to set the fan and pump separately, set the fans first, as changing the fan mode also changes the pump. I know RGB software is just bad, basically all of it. For example, if you want the basic rainbow puke cycle, RGB Fusion's rainbow mode includes a flashing element for some reason. Now, there are additional modes just for the pump, including 2 temperature modes. Temp 1 changes all the pump lighting from blue to green to yellow, orange to red as the CPU temperature rises, while temperature 2 will just use the right side of the pump for the temperature gradient, while the left side doesn't actually sync with the fans, but stays in the pink and blue 3 color mode. So simply select the number of fans that you're controlling, as you can daisy chain more fans to the AIO RGB cable, set the speed and brightness, and hit apply. Now, let's jump into the performance of the Aorus Waterforce 240, and for comparison, the 5 other 240mm AIOs on the chart include the Cooler Master Master Liquid LC240E, the Enermax LickMax 3, the Lian Galahad, the Vetro V240, and the Ego AT240. Again, I'm cooling a Ryzen 7 3700X with a TDP limit of 90 watts. To start, let's take a look at fan speed range for each of these coolers, and you see the Aorus uses aggressive fans in relation to the other AIOs, and because of this, when I bring in the peak noise levels, the Aorus is the loudest. When it comes to AIO noise, regardless of how quiet the actual fan is, most of the noise is due to turbulence of the air rushing through the radiator. I didn't include idle noise levels because honestly, almost every one of the AIOs was so quiet at idle, my sound level meter couldn't pick it up over the ambient noise of my studio. But I will say from my perception, it was a toss-up between the Enermax and the Aorus to which one was the quietest, meaning both were virtually inaudible. Moving on to actual temperatures, the charts show the average temperature accumulated through the test period in light blue, with peak or maximum temperatures recorded in dark blue. All CPU T-control temperatures are delta T Celsius, or recorded temperatures minus ambient recorded in degrees Celsius, and are the accumulated average of no less than 9 tests. Beginning with the system idle temps, which will begin the trend you're gonna see throughout every chart I put up, and reinforce what I said way back my first AIO review about how there isn't too much manufacturers can do to make an AIO perform better, especially when most are based on the same exact design. At most, they can improve performance by a few degrees, which is what you're about to see. The separation between the best and worst coolers is at most right around 3 degrees for every test. You see here the range of average idle temps is 10.3 to 12.2 degrees, only 1.9 degrees of separation. Looking at the averages of those 4 tests, we see the Aorus just squeaks out the victory, keeping average temps just 0.4 of a degree lower than the Ago cooler. But as I said, the gap between them all is minimal. With an overclock pushing the total package power draw to 135 watts, the Aorus cooler shows the largest margin of cooling over the other AIOs. With the stock fan set to max RPM, the Waterforce 240 with the fastest fans comes in second behind the Vetro cooler. Finally, in the fan normalized test, the stock fans are replaced with a set of Noctua NFP12 Redux fans set at a constant 1700 RPM. Here, likely due to its slightly denser radiator and more efficient pump, the Aorus does very well, beating the rest of the coolers in both average and max temperatures. So, performance-wise, the Aorus Waterforce 240 did well in comparison to the other AIOs, especially in very CPU-intensive workloads and when overclocking. So, what are its weak points? Well, let me put up one last slide and, yeah, right there. That price of $169 is not just steep compared to the other AIOs on this chart, but costs $30 to $50 more than other popular 240 AIOs like the NZXT Kraken, the Corsair IQ series, Fantex Glacier, even MSI's new AIOs. I think with the exception of the AIOs with the LCD screens like the Waterforce X, this may be the most expensive 240mm AIO out there. So I'm not gonna say too much else on that point. You saw the cost, you saw the performance, and you saw the features. You can make up your own mind on the price to performance point. Let's talk about the features a little. First, cable management. I like the fact that all the fan and RGB cables can be connected at the radiator and there isn't a need to run anything to the motherboard. It would have been nice to also route the SATA cable up to the radiator too, just leaving the single USB cable coming from the pump block, but that's not a huge deal. However, on the other side, I personally don't like or trust a post-UEFI process like the Aorus engine software controlling my CPU cooling fans and pump. However, I do know that many people like the convenience of being able to have quick access to their fan settings right in their operating system. The RGB Fusion software is not great, not that any RGB software is great, but I will say, unlike some other RGB peripherals out there, like IQ, the Aorus fans just have a standard 3-pin addressable RGB connector and a standard 4-pin PWM fan connector, so you can daisy chain pretty much any standard fan or RGB device to the AIO and it'll sync up with RGB Fusion. Or you can skip RGB Fusion altogether by using a simple fan and RGB splitter cable. This will allow you to plug the fans and RGB directly to the motherboard and control the fans through the UEFI. This is actually how I tested the AIO, so the fans were controlled on the same exact fan curve as all the rest of the AIOs. Now, the one note on this is that you can control the fan RGB with your motherboard software, so in the case of my test bench, I can use the Asus Aura to sync the fans to the rest of my motherboard lighting, but there's no way to control the pump lighting other than with RGB Fusion through the USB control. So my ultimate conclusion on the Aorus Waterforce 240, I think the cost is prohibitive for most consumers. There are some things that make this cooler intrinsically more expensive than say the $60 or $70 coolers here, mostly the internal electronics and firmware that communicates with the Aorus software and controls the fans and lighting, and the ceramic bearing pump axle, which should be much more resilient. But then there are also less than ideal components like the sleeve bearing fans. Sleeve bearings can be very quiet, but can also start to suffer from fan whine, especially when mounted horizontally. They can also have a much higher fail rate than, say, fluid dynamic bearings, especially if operating at higher temperatures. So, who exactly is this for? Well, I'd say that if you're already deep in the Aorus or Gigabyte ecosystem, you have an Aorus motherboard, a Gigabyte graphics card, an Aorus gaming monitor, other peripherals, a mouse or keyboard, even one of the Gigabyte chassis, then it may be worth it to you to pick up an Aorus Waterforce AIO to seamlessly integrate into your PC. I always preach price to performance, but to be completely transparent, I personally have no problem paying a convenience tax to make things in my life easier. And not having to run 2, 3, or more different software applications to get all the stuff in a PC build to sync up and work is worth paying a little bit more for. And this is $40 cheaper than the Waterforce X240, which I think is now the only other Aorus or Gigabyte brand AIO still available. But if you want to see current pricing on this and all the coolers, check the links in the description below. There's also links to my reviews on all the 240mm AIOs I've done. It'd be great if you hit that like button before you go. If you have any questions, be sure to ask in the comments, and I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe.